Hey guys, Dalton here quick before we jump into episode 87 of the PT Coffee Cast. I just wanted to say thank you for tuning into another episode. Thank you for the constant support. It means the world to us. We love seeing the messages from you guys on Instagram, the reviews on iTunes, the subscriptions. It really does continue to push us to put out content for you guys. So first and foremost, thank you. On this episode today, we sit down with Tim Rowland, a physiotherapist out of Sydney, Australia. He is otherwise known as the ACL guy on Instagram. Today, we sat down with Tim and talked about all things ACL. We talked about ACL surgeries, the rehab, what we could do better, returning to sport. We also talked about the research that's starting to come out about not necessarily having to go for surgery in order to get people back to sport, specifically cutting sports. Tim has had the opportunity to actually work with a couple athletes that have decided to avoid doing ACL reconstruction surgery and try to rehab the conservative way and get back to sport. And he's had success with that, which is very interesting and important, I think, for our profession. So we jump in and we talk a lot about that. I think you guys will really enjoy this podcast. Tim is a wealth of knowledge with regards to the ACL and like end stage rehab, getting people back to performance. He is also one of the co-founders of Physio Network. If you haven't heard of Physio Network, it's an online platform that provides evidence-based research reviews. So basically each month they will have research reviews done by professionals in the physio space on the most up-to-date research. It's an awesome platform, guys. I highly suggest you check it out. You can consume the content by reading. You can consume it through audio version. They have everything covered. They also offer master classes to continue to grow and improve your continuing education background. So many options with this platform, guys. It's amazing. I highly suggest you check that out. If you want to find Tim on social, you can find him at the ACL guy on Instagram. It's Tim Rowland on Facebook. He's putting out really good content there, guys, about the ACL, about rehab, so check it out. If you want to follow the Physio Network, the best place probably to access them would be their website, physionetwork.com, or you can also follow them on Instagram at Physio Network. If you guys want to follow us, of course, head over to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Follow at the MVMT-PTs. And most importantly, guys, if you took value away from this episode, please head over to iTunes, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with one other person. All right, guys, I'm going to stop talking, so grab your cups and enjoy episode 87 with Tim Rowland. Welcome to the Movement PT Coffee Cast, where we sit down and talk about physical therapy, health, and whatever else comes to mind during our coffee-infused conversations. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Movement PT Coffee Cast. My name's Dalton, and with me, as always, is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
Doing good. I have a question for you, Dalton.
Shoot.
With this mug that I've got here,
yes,
is the mug small, or did I just get bigger?
I think you got bigger, bro.
You think so?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
It's all those
awesome.
it's all those deadlifts and squats you've been doing.
Well, you're right. You got the answer right. I'm drinking a normal size cup. I'm just huge.
Exactly.
How are you doing?
Good, man. I can't complain. It's a late night podcast for us. We're not usually doing these late night podcasts anymore, but since our guest is on the other side of the world, we've decided to do an evening podcast. So I'm going to bring on our guest. We are talking to Tim Rowland, who's a physiotherapist out of Sydney, Australia. He specializes in late-stage rehab and return to play for ACL injuries. He's also a strength and conditioning coach, and we're super excited to have him on. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, guys. Sorry to spoil a crazy, wild Saturday night for you over there.
Yeah, no problem. We're trying to tame ourselves, Me and Will get pretty wild. as I sip my tea.
You what kind of coffee do you drink over there?
Now, I've got a confession, guys.
Oh, here we go.
It might break your hearts, but I actually don't drink coffee. So should I just leave now, or?
Yeah, we'll hang up now, and we'll. Thanks for coming on.
It's nice knowing you.
I get weird looks from everyone, but I'm one of those guys that just never ever really got into it, and I tend to get my caffeine from Coke Zero and no sugar. I still get it from like diet soft drink, so a bit of a random one. But yeah, sorry to wreck the party and spoil the show.
That's okay. You're not the first person. I think that's probably like maybe the third guest we've had that says they don't drink coffee. So you're not alone.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. So Tim, why don't you just start off and maybe give a little bit of background about like yourself to our listeners, and maybe how you ended up in like the profession of physiotherapy, and specifically around like ACL and sport performance.
Yeah, sure. I guess I started off like most people, who end up doing sports physio and played a lot of sport growing up and loved sport, and then got injured a lot because of that as well. And spent a lot of time on the physio bed as well, and sort of got exposed to physio quite early in the piece. And I thought it'd be a really cool degree because I'm quite a scientific-minded person and genuinely quite a caring person too. And you combine that with sport and then sort of land physio there. So I did a Bachelor of Physio and graduated with first class honours in that. But during my physio degree, I actually tore my own ACL. So that sort of started the interest and the passion in that area. And I was doing a ton of obviously exercise rehab and strength training throughout my physio degree. And I sort of found myself towards the end of physio reading more and more about exercise science and strength and conditioning rather than your typical physio topics, and realized that maybe my true passion lies really in the exercise rehab side of things in particular. So I decided to follow up my physio degree with a master's in high performance sport, which is where all the exercise science stuff came in. And now these days I'm kind of like a hybrid physio and strength and conditioning coach, and work in a couple of different areas. I work with a semi-professional rugby team as their head of athletic performance. So that's sort of where more the S&C side of things comes in. And then, as you guys know, I do a lot of ACL rehab. I'm seeing about 13 or 14 ACL clients in, week out. I'm doing their rehab for them, and they're from a range of different sports and backgrounds. And then also I'm one of the founders of Physio Network, which I'm sure we'll chat about a little bit later. But yeah, so do a few different things, but definitely love combining my passion of physio and S&C, and it's sort of, they complement each other so well. So it's really natural.
Yeah, maybe just flowing off that last little comment there. How do you think, like, what about them make like complements so well?
Well, the way I sort of see things is when you're working with any athlete, or even a rehab athlete or a healthy athlete, physios and S&C should operate on the same spectrum. It's the same continuum, and it's just that the client is at a different point along the continuum. It's not like physios and S&C should be in separate silos and they have nothing to do with each other. It's just they're at different points along the same continuum. So if you have a good understanding of that earlier point or that later point, then you can handle someone well throughout the whole rehab process. So that's sort of where I love ACL rehab, because it's such a long process of 9 to 12 months, and you need to be able to understand the initial rehab and then that final high-end performance, to return them back to performance, not just being able to return back to their sport and play averagely. So that's where it sort of works really well, having the two together, and you can take someone from A to Z, and I love that.
Do you, in your practice, I know you work in like a pretty awesome facility for doing this sort of thing. Do you notice like most of your clients, when they come to you, do they already have a pretty solid background in terms of like exercise, or do you get some clients, like specifically, I guess, like maybe ACL rehab, who maybe just play their sport, and then when they're coming to you, like the exercise is sort of, not the exercise, but the strength training is sort of like a new component?
Yeah, I'm pretty fortunate where I work in that, where we're a athletic performance facility called Athletes Authority, and the large majority, at least 90% of people who come to me, have some kind of background in strength training anyway, because most of them are playing at either a semi-professional level or a very high club level. So they are very serious athletes. So It's rare that I'd get someone that hasn't done any strength training before. So that obviously makes the buy-in process a lot easier. So yeah, I'm quite fortunate in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how you're talking about the spectrum of like from physio to strength coach, and they kind of all fall on the same spectrum there, and it's important. I know you recently had posted something I think I saw on Facebook about an article on Physio Network that talked about key things that maybe physios should know about strength and conditioning. Are you seeing now that more physios are starting to educate themselves in this, or do you think it's still an area where maybe we could all get better at?
I like to think that physios are doing more in the exercise space, but I think there's a bit of bias there in terms of who I surround myself with as physios and who I see myself, on social media with. I think if you did a big survey across the board, it would still be quite poor in terms of how upskilled physios are generally in the exercise rehab side of things. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but for example, in Australia, normally in a physiotherapy degree, only 1 out of the total 32 units you do is on exercise prescription, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, like how powerful a tool exercise rehab is. You barely learn about it. So, I think we need to be doing more and more. And if you are working with athletes or highly active people, you simply need to upskill yourself and either do further formal study or informal study to allow yourself to handle those sort of people really well. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of blends into that whole return to sport thing and making sure people are prepared. I think something, at least like, I mean, I've only been out about a year practicing, but what I've heard and seen in certain clinics is like, we don't even have the ability to properly load or prepare these athletes to even get back to like that sport at times because of this whole maybe separation from the strength and conditioning side of things.
Yeah, 100%. Like in Australia, there's either a problem of they don't have the facilities in the place that they work to do it properly, or they don't have the knowledge, and sometimes it's a combination of both. And I think as physios, if you don't have those things, you just need to let the ego go and realize maybe I should refer on to someone who can do that, and it's for the best of the athlete, and that's what we should always be thinking about, the athlete first. So yeah,
that's a good point.
What is it about like the ACL injury and rehab process that really like drew you in?
I think it's a great mix of my two areas of study. So physio and S&C, there's like as we've spoken about, a bit of a continuum where maybe in that first 3 months, physio is the main person you're working with, and then S&C is helping train the rest of the body. And then rather than there being like a distinct cutoff where it's like a handover and you never have anything to do with them again, it sort of should be a gradual process of maybe at the start it's 90% physio, 10% S&C. And as it goes along, it sort of flips over at the very end of the rehab to being 90% S&C, 10% physio. So I really like the fact that I feel confident to handle someone through the whole process because I have background in both areas, which having that continuity and building that rapport with the athlete when it's a very tough time for them mentally, I think it's really good for the athlete to have that one person they can really rely on and be their best buddy throughout the process. So I really love that. And then the other part of it is there's a really nice blend of both science and art in ACL rehab. Like we don't have a study for every single type of person in front of you. So you kind of have to take what you can from the research and then realize, okay, they need to get back to being able to do this. How do I bridge that gap, knowing what we do? And then there's a bit of a nice art to the whole thing. So I really enjoy that side of it as well.
Yeah, totally. That kind of segues into something I wanted to ask you about. It was something that you posted on your page, and it said an ACL injury is also a brain injury. So I was curious about like what you kind of meant by that.
Yeah, sure. I guess when you have an ACL injury, because you've got to go back through the whole process of learning how to move again in every way, like fundamental movement patterns, learning how to run again. It literally is a retraining process for the brain to learn how to perform all those motor actions again, and you've got to start from square one. So obviously when it's a bit of a play on words. Obviously, it's not actually a brain injury, but it obviously affects the cognitive elements so heavily, and you've got to retrain and break down movement patterns and build the person back up again. So people often forget that. They just sort of looking at the knee itself, but it's such a whole type thing that goes with an ACL injury. So that's more or less what I meant by it. And then there's also some research in terms of preventing ACL injuries that sort of show the importance of the cognitive side of things too. And there's some research out there showing that people who have delayed processing speeds or delayed reaction times are more likely to injure their ACL, because let's say, for example, you're running the ball up and there's a good opening that comes up and you process it a little bit later and you have to put yourself in a slightly more provocative position because you want to go in that gap, but you didn't process it fast enough and you sort of throw the leg out there and you'd be at a higher risk of doing an ACL. So there's also that side of things from a prevention point of view as well, and in terms of the cognitive elements too. So yeah, it's quite interesting, all that side of stuff. So.
And I feel like that's where a lot of that creativity has to come in, especially like which sport did you say you played?
Rugby union's the main sport that I am involved in.
So like, like you're going to get all kinds of people playing different sports, and then figuring out, like how you're going to sort of like train them to prepare them for reacting to the types of things they might see in their sport. There's probably a lot of creativity that kind of goes along with that, especially like later on in the.
Yeah, 100%. So you need to have a really good understanding of the demands of the sport that you're getting your athlete back to in order to actually fully prepare them. So, for example, if I'm working with like a netballer versus a rugby player, it's going to be completely different, that very last part of the rehab, where the really sport-specific stuff comes in, because a netballer does a bunch of jumping and leaping through the air and landing on one leg and all that sort of stuff that a rugby player, especially in certain positions, might not do very much of. So, yeah, you definitely need to tailor that end-stage rehab depending on exactly what the person's going back to doing.
Is netball like volleyball?
Oh, so netball, like I didn't know you knew that.
Yeah, man, I was just like, we don't have netball in Canada.
Definitely not like, okay, it's like basketball, but imagine you can't move with the ball. You just land, like you catch the pass and you can take one more step and then so you can imagine the kind of forces that go through the knees and ankles.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the easiest way to explain it. It's like basketball, but move with the ball. So yeah.
Makes sense.
Cool.
With regards to like the end stages of rehab, I know that's something that you really like to specialize in. What are like some really important things that you try to like that you make sure are done or need to be done before returning an athlete to their respective sport?
Yeah, sure. I guess that flows on nicely from what we spoke about before. Like, one, understanding what are the key movements or activities in that sport that place the knee at the highest risk of injury, and making sure you systematically and gradually expose them to the sorts of stresses that they're going to have to go through for that particular event. And then I think a real one that's often overlooked is actually how they integrate back into training and integrate back into games. A lot of people, they sort of do their return to play tests at whatever period of time, and they say, okay, you've passed them all, you're good to go, launch back into training. And they don't realize that maybe the kind of loads they've done in their rehab, they might have added up. Let's say I'm working with a rugby player, they might have, during all their rehab running and rehab drills, they might have covered 2 kilometers in a training session. And then everyone else in their training sessions are doing 6 kilometers. You say, oh, you've passed your return to play test now, go back to full training. And it's this huge load spike, which actually puts them at greater risk of the ACL injury again and other injuries. So I think learning how to build up either someone's rehab loads to get them back to actually be able to successfully return to training, that's a big one. Or understanding, okay, how do I integrate them back slowly and pick and choose certain drills that allow them to build up their chronic training load over a period of several weeks before they turn back to play. I think that's something that's really not understood very well, and building back a high chronic training load is the most protective thing you can arguably do in terms of reducing the risk of injury. So they're some of the real key ones, I think.
Right. Yeah. Because like a practice could be like a couple of hours with like tons and tons of drills and that kind of thing, and probably not going to be able to get that at like during your actual sessions. Yeah, totally. Like that's a tricky one. Like how would you kind of reintegrate that like back? Like what's a typical sort of like process of getting someone back into training and practicing
Yeah, so I'm fortunate in my setting that we actually have GPS units, which make things a lot easier in terms of understanding loads. So if I have a GPS unit on my rehab athlete, and then I have a GPS unit on someone in a similar position to him that plays rugby, and then I start to look at the load and I go, hey, he's covering X distance training, X amount of high speed meters. I just literally need to prepare that athlete to be hitting similar to those numbers before I'm happy for them to just go back into training with everyone. And then that makes the process easier. Obviously, that's a luxury to have those things. But if you don't have them, you need to just have some kind of understanding of how long they're training for, have some kind of understanding of how many sort of accelerations and decelerations and high speed meters they cover, and just have a bit of a think about it as best you can. And if you're ticking off all the different movement demands that someone will do in training, and they're going for as long as a training session happens, you're probably on a pretty good path there.
Yeah, sweet. I was curious. I know like the psychosocial factors for recovery is a big thing that we talk about in like the physio space just in general. And I'm sure there's a lot that go along with like the ACL and like fear of going back to sport and like confidence. Are those things that you consider throughout like the process, and maybe how are you like managing those or even measuring them throughout like your sessions with your athletes?
Yeah, I think psychology is an absolutely massive one for ACL injury. Even speaking for myself, the last thing that came back for me was confidence. I physically was ready to pass all the tests, but just that ability to not be thinking about it at all and just instinctively step hard off that leg and not come to your mind at all. That was something that took, a couple of years even after returning to play to go away. So I think psychology is a massive one. I like to assess it both formally and informally. So obviously, there's an ACL return to sport index, which is a little screening tool that, that they answer sort of 10 to 12 questions and rate 1 to 5 about how confident they are in the knee and whether they think about it, and all these sorts of questions. And I think that's important to do from a formal point of view. But I find that it comes up. It's something that should come up in conversation when you're working with your clients all the time. Like when you're getting closer to returning to sport, that sort of 2 months, start asking them, are you worried about getting back to in the sport? And you try to realize, 90% of the time, it's how it happened in the first place. That's the biggest thing they're worried about. So it's quite interesting. Like I might work with 2 different rugby players, and one's done theirs in a contact situation where they've gotten, whacked from the side and knees bashed into valgus, and they've done their ACL that way. And then another guy who's done it from, landing after going to catch a high ball. And the person who's done it from landing isn't even worried about contact one bit. And the person who's, done it in contact can step hard off the leg, jump and land, and they're not worried about that at all. They're just worried about the contact again. So I find that it's highly specific to how the injury happened. And the best way to deal with it is to talk to them about it, work out what their biggest fears are, and then figure how can I gradually expose them to that sort of a situation and build up their graded exposure to handling it mentally. And that's normally quite a good way to build their confidence in that area. And yeah, that's how I approach it.
And I guess you're making sure that you're challenging them hard enough in the rehab sessions where they have the chance to develop that confidence.
Yes.
I feel like where maybe there's a little bit more fear is when there's so much unknown because you haven't been challenged in that way,
Yeah.
So you really don't know. And then you're just jumping back into it.
Yeah, the last thing I want is for like my athlete to do something for the first time back when they're playing a game rather than in a nice controlled rehab setting. So you do need to push them 100%. And whether that's like if it's a landing mechanism, how they did it, doing like a big partner perturbation where you're really shoving them in the air and challenging them that way, or really challenging their ability to just be put off at the last second and see whether they can still handle absorbing that impact well. Like that's a good example for landing. And whether it's a change in direction mechanism, like sidestep, there's heaps of really good drills where you can get players jumping into gaps and they've got to run through the other one at the last second. And there's ways you can overload it to be as close to a game as possible. Obviously, with the contact side of things, you can never predict exactly how hard someone's going to get hit from a whatever angle, but you can do your best, and then at the end of the day, it's all you can really do. So yeah, you've got to try to prepare them as best you can.
Tim, I didn't think we were supposed to tackle our patients in the.
Luckily, I work with guys often out on field as well. So I go, like, I take them up the park, and I don't hit them, but I run small group sessions with a couple of players at the same time, and they're perfect because they can work with each other. But yeah, definitely don't be doing that in a 4-meter treatment room and crashing.
I was picturing you just like putting on some pads and just getting further and further back. Just wait there, okay? Just start sprinting at them like
Wasn't myself and so may join in from time to time, but
well, that's great.
With regards to the return to sport, like, because you work with a team, do you work closely with like surgeons that see the players that you're working with?
Yeah, we're lucky enough at the place I work to have a club doctor who is our link between, you know, surgeons and the players. So she's not the surgeon herself, but she links us up with all the relevant surgeons, which is fantastic. So I don't deal directly with the surgeon, but I deal directly with her, and we have many conversations about that side of things. So yeah, and I guess this could lead on to a couple of different questions, but I'll see where you want to take it. But yeah, we do have links with surgeons, so for sure.
Yeah, you're seeing my little segue here, I think. Yeah, but I know you put a post out talking about like your surgeon may not be the best person to talk about like to have you return to sport or be the one to comment on that. So I think I know what you mean by that, but I would like to hear you just like elaborate a little bit more on that comment.
Yeah, sure. So obviously the surgeon is the penultimate expert on doing the surgery, checking the integrity of the graft, making sure everything is perfect from the knee joint point of view. But what I found is that, I mean, so think about how much surgeons have to know. There's no way that one person can be across every single aspect of the return to play process. It's just impossible, simply. So a surgeon typically isn't going to understand the functional elements of return to play very well, simply because it's just like, I don't know the surgery side of things, like physios don't know this. It's impossible to be across every single area. So I think we just need to respect that there are areas that we are going to be experts in, and there's going to be other areas that are just as important for return to play that we don't know as much about. And if a surgeon just sees someone at 9 months, reviews a scan, does a quick Lockman test, plays around with the knee a bit and goes, yeah, you're good to return to sport, that's just not good enough, because the surgeon would have no idea about how they're actually functioning, what their strength levels are like, how they're moving in decelerating, changing direction, landing, all that stuff. And sure, the ACL can be as strong as possible when he feels it, but it was strong before and it still managed to get injured. So, but that just means that there was obviously something functionally that went on that wasn't perfect, and we want to make sure that those functional things have been addressed and fixed in terms of reducing the overall injury risk. So I just think that you can't rely on one person ever. Just like I would never have a patient not have their final surgery appointment. It's not like I don't want to know the surgeon's opinion either. I want to know the coach's opinion. I want to know the physio's opinion. I want to know the S&C's opinion, surgeons, the players. It needs to come from 5 or 6 different parties, and everyone needs to agree on it. And that's an optimal scenario.
Yeah, I think when you're working with them for 9 months, you're going to be seeing a lot more, throughout the process, just kind of like observing like who they are and, how they're doing with progressing with their strength and their kind of like neuromuscular stability and all that sort of thing, where, you're just not going to get that seeing them and just looking at the knee in isolation. So I definitely feel like I'm on board, and probably a collaborative approach is super important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think the part that might become challenging is like when like an athlete or even just someone who had torn their ACL goes to their surgeon, the surgeon says, "Oh yeah, you're good to go." Meanwhile, like this could be a little misleading to them, and they're like, and it could create like maybe a little bit of animosity between like even let's say the physio and the athlete. If the athlete's like, "Okay, I'm good. The surgeon said I'm good to go," and then you're like, "Whoa, hold on, like there's more to do here." And I think I think if you establish a really good relationship with that athlete, it might not be such a hard conversation to have, but I could also see how it could be challenging to like refocus that athlete on like what they need to make sure they have done before they go back.
Yeah, that's happened to me several times where patients come back and gone, surgeon said I'm good to go. And I'm like, did the surgeon look at this and that? They're like, no. I'm like, do you know that the difference between your sides and your quads is still 20-25%? They're like, yeah. And then I sort of explain that, try to educate them a little bit around that. The best thing to do too is even before they go into the surgery, just the surgeon's perspective, explain to the athlete that, look, there's many things we need to look at for return to play. So the surgeons is one very important aspect, but we also have X, Y, Z. And if they know early on they need to pass X, Y, and Z, then they're not going to be like, okay, I'm good to go. One person said so. So there's definitely a big educational component there for sure.
So to continue on this massive segue train that we've had this whole episode, I know there's some very interesting research coming out with regards to like athletes and not even doing surgery for ACL tears, complete ACL tears. So I'd be interested to hear maybe your overview on like the new research that's coming out with that. And I know you've also been working with a couple athletes yourself that have chosen to go the non-surgical option with regards to their rehab. So I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating area that's sort of becoming more and more known over the last couple of years. But the interesting thing with the research is that it's not even like a brand new study that's come out. It's just making people more aware of some older research. And the funny part about it all is that there's been hundreds of studies comparing different types of ACL RICO, but there's only been one or two studies that are randomized trials comparing surgery versus not surgery for return to sport, which is fascinating. We've done that much research trying to work out the best graph, but like one or two good studies actually working out whether you need the surgery in the first place. So
yeah,
certainly like a bit of an interesting order of priorities there. But in terms of the research, so the most key paper would be one from 2013. Actually, it's called the Canon trial by Frabel et al. And it looked at two groups of around 60 or so in each group, one that did surgery, one that didn't, and looked at a whole bunch of different outcomes. And they were active people and athletic people as well. They weren't just, couch potatoes that would never really need an ACL RICO in the first place. And so, yeah, it was quite interesting. The results showed that their quality of life and their return to sport rates and their knee pain were the same in groups, which is really fascinating considering everyone just assumes, at least in Australia, everyone assumes that, okay, you've done your ACL, when are you going for surgery? That's always the first question that's asked. And it's just a cultural belief and a norm that surgery is the way to go, when maybe we need to double take for a little bit and ask a few questions and try out non-surgical and just try some really good quality rehab first for a few months and see how the person's going. And you might get way more people being able to return back to what they want to do without surgery in the first place. So it's the research really is lacking at the moment. There's no one party should be confident based off the research and what the best answer is. And it shouldn't be that, it's so obvious that non-surgical is the way to go, just the same way that it shouldn't be, it's so obvious that surgical is the way to go. We just don't have enough research comparing the two at the moment. So if that's the case, in the meantime, would you be willing to just like jump on they don't have a couple of comparisons between using it and not using it? I certainly wouldn't be. I'd rather try without it first, try the alternative, give that a red hot crack for a few months at least and see how I go without it. And then sure, if it's not working, then that's the solution to go to. So that's sort of the approach I take with my athletes these days. If they come to me before they've considered surgery, I will explain all of this to them and say there's really very, very little harm, especially if you're not in a massive rush to get back to your sport. There's actually no harm in doing 3 or 4 months of rehab and seeing how you go. And as I said, like the people I've worked with, every one of them so far, and I've returned 2 back to a semi-professional level of sport. One's more touch football, one's more rugby, and currently working with another 3 people on non-surgical. And everyone's responded really well on everything we've done so far. And we're back to doing agility and stuff out on field that's really high end now. And that's only only 3 or 4 months after the injury, rather than to that level more like at the 9 to 12 month mark after surgery. So I definitely think that, to summarize it all, I think the best approach to take is to educate the patient after their injury, explain their options, and explain that really, in my opinion at least, there's little harm in giving the non-surgical route a good go and seeing how they respond. And you might be very surprised in terms of what the person can get back to doing without it. So sure, there's going to be cases too where you do that for 3 or 4 months and the person has, frequent instability episodes still, and it just doesn't feel right. And that might be okay. You're maybe someone who is more suited to surgery, and you have to be open to that as a physio too. You can't have too much bias either way. You just need to be open to trying both options and seeing how they go. But I would highly recommend anyone who's not returning back to, especially people who aren't returning back to like agility sports, they're really, if you do good rehab and you just return back to things like straight line running, based stuff, 9 times out of 10 you should be fine without surgery with good rehab. But then the question where it gets a little bit more, there's more question marks around it, is returning back to really high level sport in sports like NFL, rugby, soccer, all those sports that are really agility based, and they're the ones that are the toughest to get back to. So they're the ones that there might be a lower percentage of people who can return back to without surgery, but we don't have a good answer yet on what percentage of people can and can't. We need to do more research on that area. So yeah, I guess that sort of summarizes it all. But if there's any particular questions around that, hit me with them.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. That it almost seems like we need to know more, like there's so many questions there, like in terms of, is it the quality of the rehab and return to sport, I guess, process that matters most? Is it whether they get surgery or not that matters most? Like, are there certain people, like as you kind of mentioned, that maybe should get surgery versus others? Yeah, it's interesting though. It's super cool.
Yeah, to elaborate a bit more on that last question you just asked about whether we sort of can know who should and shouldn't, that's an area we're going to continue to learn more and more about. But there are some sort of criteria that we've started to realize might correlate well. And the things we're looking at there is if there's a lot of other concomitant injuries at the same time in the knee, like, they've done a bad meniscal tear, they've done an MCL tear at the same time, those sorts of people are less likely to return well without surgery. We also know that if you're older and if you're a female, you're more likely to return without surgery. So there's age and gender thing going on there. I think this too. One, what does the person need to get back to doing? Simply, like that's a huge one. Like if you don't need to get back to agility and landing and heavy stuff like that, you just simply, there's going to be less stress on the ACL anyway. So that's a huge one. And then the other one is, how good is their rehab? I honestly believe that the most important factor in determining a successful return to play is the quality of the rehab. That's either if you get surgery or you don't. I think that as we know, like even with surgery, only 2/3 of people get back to the level of sport they want to in the first place. So you lose a third there right away. And then in certain demographics, so if we're looking at people who are under 25 who return back to the sport that they did want to get back to, 1/3 of people under 25 who return back to the sport they want to do redo their ACL. So it's not like surgery is like this incredible thing that just solves all problems. I think the rehab process probably matters even more in terms of how successful it is. So, yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, and it's
that
crazy.
Idea of like surgery being.
Go ahead, Will. Yeah, you're gonna say the same thing as me. Go ahead.
Probably. I got like a little choppy with my internet there, so I didn't even know like if you were talking or not.
It's okay.
Sorry, but I was just gonna talk about the idea of like that fix, because something I'm interested in asking you about, Tim, is like, because you've seen a few people go through this process. Do you notice like people that have chosen a non-surgical route, do they get those kind of like thoughts of like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good, but like, what if I got this surgery? Could I be even better? Like, does that kind of loom over them? Do you notice that?
I haven't noticed it a great deal in terms of like they haven't often expressed that to me. I think it's only natural. The alternative is always going to be in your head. It's just like it's a human nature. If you have two big options and you do the other, you're like, I wonder whether the grass would have been greener. But I'm fortunate that people I've worked with have all gone really well so far. So that obviously, if the person started to have a lot of instability episodes, that's going to creep into their mind more and more and more. But no, like that, it's not something that they often express to me, and I try to keep as open lines of communication as possible. I want to know what they're feeling and that. But we've had pretty good outcomes so far. So I imagine that's a big reason why they haven't been asking me about surgery a lot too much so far. So yeah, I'm fortunate. But I'm not going to pick someone and say, if someone's like really young, they've done their meniscus, their MCL, and it's like it seems like one of those candidates that, Matt, you probably are better off potentially just going for surgery. I'm happy to work with you for a few months and see how you go. I'm not going to try to drag someone up the non-surgical route if they're ticking all the boxes where surgery might be the better option. I'm not going to drag someone through that process. So you kind of need to be smart in terms of your selection criteria for who you do work with, in a non-surgical way too. So yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I'm like interested in asking you is like, obviously when people hear this, it kind of sounds a little bit crazy, right? Like we've been so ingrained that like as soon as you tear your ACL, like you have to get surgery, whether it's an athlete or general population. What would be some of the benefits of not going the surgical route? Like if you were sitting down and talking with someone, and being like, hey, you should maybe take this approach, what would you say would be a benefit of taking that approach?
Yeah, sure. There's probably a few we could talk about here. So obviously if you're an athlete that's keen to get back to their sport, the time potentially to return to play is half or less than a surgical route. So, for example, and this is my favorite non-surgical story to date that I've worked with, is a guy who, it was the very last round of trials just before the season started. We played our last trial game. He's a rugby player, and he unfortunately had a contact ACL. So he got hit from the side and did his ACL, and he was crushed because the season goes for 5 months, and he knew that would mean that he'd miss the whole season and have to get surgery and all of the above. So he was devastated. And then, I ended up chatting to him the next week and sort of explained that, you're one of these people who I can see potentially, you've had a clean ACL rupture. You're in such good physical condition because we literally have just finished preseason. So he was in top nick, he was so strong, really in a good position. And I said, mate, let's give this a go. Let's have a good crack at non-surgical and let's see how you respond. And then, sure enough, 1 to 2 weeks after his ACL rupture, he's doing single leg goblet squats to a box at 9 degrees. And now it looks really good. And we're like, okay, this is interesting. This is looking promising so far. And sure enough, gradually progress him. And 3 months from the day of him doing his ACL, he returned back to the sport and scored a try by stepping really hard off that non-ACL side. And then he ended up playing the last 9 games of the season. And then his team won the grand final and they won the whole competition. So it was one of those like Cinderella stories where he would never have even thought that he would get back to playing, let alone winning a grand final. And it was amazing. So that's something that you can, if it goes well, that's a huge benefit. You can get back potentially in around the 3-month mark if everything goes really well. So that's a third of the time or sometimes a quarter of the time of having surgery. So that's one of the biggest potential benefits, and that's probably most attractive to your really high level athletes that just want to get back out on the park, as quickly as they can. So that's a one. Another one is the fact that surgery itself is a traumatic event on the knee. You're drilling through bone. You're taking a third of your hamstring tendon. You're taking a part of your patella tendon. So you have to remember that is like linked with osteoarthritis as well. Having drilling going through your bone. No one wants that in an ideal world. So there's actually some research that shows that, osteoarthritis rates post-surgery are worse than those who don't have surgery in the long run. And there has been like studies 30 to 40 years post the point someone does their ACL, and looked at two groups, and one group had surgery, one group didn't. And the studies sort of either wash out where there's similar osteoarthritis rates, or if anything worse in the surgical group. So you have to remember that, it's a traumatic event on the knee getting surgery too. So that's, and there's inherent risks with surgery in itself in terms of infection and things like that. So they're probably the two biggest benefits of not getting surgery, avoiding a traumatic event on the knee, and then getting back on the park as in a much quicker rate. So.
Yeah, I think this research is so great that it's coming out, and that we're starting to see that we can take this non-surgical route. Like, not only for people, like what comes to my mind is like, I know you're working with a lot of athletes, but maybe people that aren't even athletes, are not looking to get back to sport and don't have to be able to cut. Like they should be doing, like you're saying, like the conservative care first, and we shouldn't be pushing these people for surgery like when we don't really need to. And I think that's great for the population. But I think as a profession, we should be like, hey, look at what we can do like with our skills, right? And like run with this and be like, hey, we can help people not have to go for surgery, what puts them at risk for this, and this. And we can use our tools to get them back to life, and even sport, like high level sport in some cases. So I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I love it. Completely agree.
Just to kind of round out the conversation, I know you had mentioned at the start that you were one of the founders of Physio Network, and I just want to talk a little bit about that platform and what it's all about, and maybe give our listeners some background on it.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, I'm one of the three founders of Physio Network, and we started it's actually pretty much 2 years ago, almost to the day right now, that we launched. And I guess the whole idea behind Physio Network was just that physios know that they should be keeping up to date with all this sort of research that we've even been speaking about today. But physios are incredibly busy people. They're seeing massive patient loads, and it's actually really, really hard to keep up to date with research. Like if you had to look through all the studies that have come out, pick the ones that are actually relevant, read the whole paper, and work out what it means for you, that's a massive process. That's like, a couple of hours per paper. And we think that is just, we don't want to make it so hard for physios to do that. So we've sort of ended up with a bunch of different experts across the world. There are a lot of different topic areas. And what they do for us is they pick a key paper that's come out in the last few months on their area of expertise, and they read it, they analyze it, and they summarize it and break it down and give you sort of the clinical implications of how that should affect your day-to-day practice. And you can read their review on that paper in 5 minutes, rather than having to spend sort of hours finding the research, reading it yourself, breaking it down and working out what it means to you. You can just have an expert on that topic summarize it for you and tell you what you need to know from it. So, we put out 12 papers per month in like a monthly sort of e-magazine subscription, and you can read it in an hour, and you're up to date with some of the most important research that's come out in that last month or so. So we're just trying to make it easier for physios to remain evidence-based, because it's very, very, very easy to fall behind, and because you're so busy working with patients all the time. And we truly believe in the importance of being evidence-based. And so we've teamed up with these people to help make it as easy as possible for physios. So that's sort of the idea behind Physio Network.
Yeah. And it's awesome to see like the list of people that you have on there. Like we've even had the pleasure to talk to some people that you have, like Jared Hall, I think he's one of the people that's on there, like Teddy Wilsey, Greg Lehman. Like we've had some of those people on our podcast to talk, and like, it's just awesome to see. I think Dr. Tom Walters was someone else that you guys had too. And we've talked to him, like the people contributing that we've talked to. It's like, it's awesome that you have those people on your team, reviewing these articles.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We're very blessed to have them on board, and they're I think part of the reason for them getting on board with our project is that they truly believe in the importance of being evidence-based as well. So they were happy to support something that helped make it easy for physios to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. What just for like our listeners that would be more interested, what would someone get with like a subscription, like a monthly subscription to the newsletter, or to the platform? Sorry.
Yeah. So it's actually a membership site. So rather than it being just like something that's emailed out every month, it's an actual like members area we have where you log in and you can, read all the reviews, and we have over 300 now because, as I said, we launched 2 years ago, and we have over 300 papers now. So they can read all of these, and we also have audio recordings of all of them as well, because we find that physios often they want to just listen to it on the way to work or on public transport or whatever it is, rather than having to read. We just try to make it as easy as possible to digest all the information. There's also like quizzes on there that people can use to get continuing education credits as well, which in the USA and Australia and the UK we're accredited for, which is cool. And then there's also a bit of a bonus content section on there where we have a bunch of different lectures and videos on different topics, where we sort of try to upload something there every month or so, just as a bit of extra information that they can check out. And we've also just recently launched a different arm of our service, online lectures as well. We've called these like Physio Network Masterclass. So we've started with 4 of them. We got Andre Moser, we got Rich Willie, we got and a couple more too. And we've just launched that in the last few weeks. And the idea behind that is some people just prefer learning through video content rather than written. So that's a separate subscription, but it's all, if you subscribe to both, it's all in your members area there, and you can you can check that out too. So it's sort of like a platform that helps physios really just keep up to date with some of the key research that's come out, and makes it as easy as possible to do that through whether it's written or audio, and then get continuing education credit at the same time. So
Yeah, I love the audio option. Like I've checked it out, and I've read like some of couple of the reviews of like the papers that come out, and like the audio thing is so cool because like you can just sit there and, like you're saying, you can do whatever you want, and you can listen to it. And I think it's just a great option for people to be consuming this information.
Yeah, everyone learns in different ways. So, we've got written now, we've got video, we've got audio. So you can kind of pick and choose what's best suited for you. And that's the way.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Tim, can you leave where people can find you? All that stuff, Physio Network, and even your personal page or your website.
Yeah. So on Instagram, if you're interested in the ACL side of things, then the best place to follow me would be on Instagram, which is _the ACL guy. Try a bit of a take on Brett Contreras there, the glute guy. Definitely inspo for that one for sure. So that's where most of my ACL stuff can be found. And then feel free to add me on Facebook. I'm really active probably on Facebook from a more personal point of view. I post about a bit of everything there, a bit of Physio Network stuff, a bit of ACL stuff. And then obviously we have the Physio Network, Facebook and Instagram platforms as well. So if you're interested in that side of things, we try to do a daily post on something that's valuable for physios as well as occasionally talk about our research reviews as well. So if you're keen on just physio content, Physio Network is a good one to follow for sure.
Sweet. Tim, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to us. I'm sure you got a lot going on with all of these endeavors that you're pursuing, but we appreciate it. I think it's going to be super helpful to people to hear more about this ACL rehab and the important things around it. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Great to chat.
All right. Well, you enjoy your warm, sunny day, and Will and I will enjoy our dark, cool evening.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, Tim, we'll talk to you later.
Awesome.
Bye.